morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios 99.1 FM, life-changing radio. Shouting out to all of you around the country on WJMM and Facebook. Good morning. And, there's a whole lot of talk about fear today. Matter of fact, I was just listening in to the end of Joyce Meyer's message. I follow her every day on WJMM.com. And, she's just a wonderful, awesome teacher. But she was talking about fear. There's a lot of talk about fear. She got a new book out called The Battle Belongs to the Lord or something like that. And we just talk about fear. I think we live in a fearful time. And that's understandable. I mean, look at our nation. All of the hate crimes going on, all the fear, before this was the fear of ISIS. I had friends really paralyzed by the fear of the presence of ISIS in our country, and we certainly seem to have, eradicated that under President Trump, and seems that we don't have that kind of fear, but we've got almost like Civil War fear, and then we have our own fears within ourselves, and, we're the fear of success or the fear of failure. Just a lot of talk and a lot of books and a lot of ministers, speaking about fear. And so I think to get to perhaps the most powerful discussion about fear, we can actually go to Hosea chapter 4. And I know that the root word in this particular clause within Hosea 4:1 has a lot to do with fear. So let's look at this in a surprising way. Perhaps the greatest fear we should be aware of. Perhaps we're not today. And this is where we all need to go. So, today's message, if you're just tuning in, this is Sandra Leslie White. We're going to talk about fear or folly. Hosea 4:1, New American Standard Version this morning. Let's listen to the word of the Lord. It begins by saying, "Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land." All right, so we're looking at this verse. We're still in chapter 4, verse 1. We've gone through what it means in terms of there is no faithfulness. This is the case that Yahweh has against the land now. He's gone from the case against Gomer, the wayward wife of Hosea, to the case against the land. And we know that Hosea is representative of a symbolic marriage that this holy prophet named Hosea had with his wayward wife named Gomer, who was a temple prostitute. And the picture, whether you take it literally as Augustine did, or you look at it figuratively as Calvin did, or you're somewhere in between, the message is rooted in the spiritual adultery, the faithlessness of God's people toward him. That Yahweh is being overtaken in the hearts of his people by the Canaanite gods of the day, by the cultural chaos of the day. And perhaps it was their quick fix, their quick answer to fear in their own lives, that they would not have the things that they needed, that they saw that the Canaanite gods delivered rather quickly. So remember, they were gods of the sun and the moon and the stars, gods of fertility, which were the ones we focus on that were in the temple of the day, fertility of the family, fertility of the fields. So if you have fear in your lives that things are not coming about, there's gods of rain, there's gods of the land, there's gods of the plants, I don't know how many gods. I should know the answer to that. How many gods were in the land that were competing with the one true God, Yahweh, for provision primarily for his people. And that seems to be the root of our fear. You know, we live in the most prosperous country in the world, yet we have fear of provision, don't we? Fear of the weather, fear of our safety, fear of our ability to provide for ourselves, our children, families, etc. So there's just a lot to be learned today about this case against the inhabitants of the land, because there's no faithfulness, there's no kindness. I got a lot of comments on that one. But today we land on knowledge of God in the land. Knowledge of God in the land. So let's look at this knowledge of God in the land. That is, that word knowledge, I think, is important for us to understand the context and the relevance of this passage today. And we're going to look into the Hebrew word da'eth, deriving from dea, which is a feminine noun that comes from the root word of knowledge, knowing. And that seems, to be fairly, superficial, actually. I mean, knowledge of God, not knowing God, doesn't that make sense? But it goes deeper into this derivative noun, which means knowledge, insight, intelligence, understanding, wisdom, cunning. It is knowledge which was gained through the senses. I think that's interesting. The Latin Vulgate uses scientia to translate this idea. It occurs 93 times in the Hebrew Old Testament. Though it is generally a term for knowledge, it can be personal, technical, or discernment. God possesses it, and nothing can be hidden from him. He teaches da'eth, this Hebrew word, to man. The kind of wisdom is the opposite. This kind of wisdom is the opposite of folly. It is the contemplative perception of a wise man. This word is also used for moral cognition, the knowledge of God, along with the fear of the Lord, describes the proper relationship between God and a man who truly obeys him. And this is where Hosea 4:1 and other verses in Hosea is referenced. During the Messianic age, the knowledge of God would cover the earth like the ocean. That comes from Isaiah 11:9 and Habakkuk 2:14. And we are in the Messianic age. So the knowledge of God would cover the earth like the ocean. But backing up into this, the knowledge of God, along with the fear of the Lord, describes the proper relationship between God and a man who truly obeys him. So this is a powerful root word and closely related in this context to fear of the Lord. And we know that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This is this attitude of respect, of awe, of actually invoking all the senses. So with our entire being, to fear the Lord is to be in awe of the Lord and to be in proper relationship with him in obedience. So when we think of our ability to see, to hear, to touch, to taste, to feel, we think of all of our senses, I think, being involved in the fear of the Lord and being rooted then in the knowledge of God. And this is where he is in this passage today. There is no faithfulness, kindness, or knowledge of God. No fear of the Lord in the land. So it seems to me that, when we think about those of you who have children, you all have been children, right? That it is when we lose that level of respect with our children that we begin to truly fear for them. I want you to think about that. When I'm raising my children, getting to their heart was my goal. And that the fear of the Lord, the teaching of the Lord, the knowledge of God in their lives through the scriptures that would help guide them through life's difficulties. And my goodness, for young people today, the challenges they have are far greater than the ones that I had in my generation, and certainly you can go back to my parents' generation was not nearly the challenges that I had. So where we are now in the land with our young people is the most critical time, I think, in our nation. That we have this opportunity in the Messianic age. We have this opportunity with Messiah, with Jesus, to really exhibit, explain, and live out the life of Christ in our own families so that our children develop a healthy fear, a knowledge of God, so that they have a base, a foundation from which to make decisions as they go on through this minefield of the millennials. I mean, to me, it is just a minefield for millennials today. So this is where we are with Hosea in the latter part of the 8th century BC, where all of these Canaanite gods are influencing the people. They're not only influencing the adults, the Hebrew men and women that know better. They have a knowledge of God. They've been raised in terms of their understanding of Torah, their understanding of Yahweh, their understanding of the Pentateuch, their understanding of the miraculous, their understanding of Yahweh as their one true God, and yet they are falling into a fearful state and a state of folly. So this fear of the Lord, the opposite of that is our own folly. So when you think about it, we think in terms of, I don't know about you, when I think about my own folly, some of my ridiculous decisions that I make are typically based out of my flesh or the world or the enemy himself. Those foolish things, foolish decisions that I make, they're rooted in folly because they are not rooted in the fear of the Lord or the knowledge of God. And so I can trace every single one of them if I really took the time to do it. I've traced the major decisions that I've made that were foolish. I can trace them back into the Word of God, into the knowledge of God, and see where I went wrong. How often we make these decisions on our own because we feel like they are wise, or we feel like, man is wise in his own understanding. But we are not consulting the Word of God on the issue. And so if you think about it, if you want to write down, your foolish decisions, things that have taken you places you did not want to go, can trace those back to what does the Word of God say about that? What is the knowledge of God in my own land, in my own community, in my own home? What is the knowledge of God that would have kept me from my own folly? Again, the title of the message today is Fear or Folly. And so he is all about making sure that we understand that the only case he would ever have against us is that, and I'll say it again, there's no faithfulness, there's no stability, faithfulness to God. There's no kindness. I love the definition I posted. I got lots of people commenting on that post and lots of people sharing that post about kindness being defined as sharing our strength with someone instead of revealing their weakness. That's kindness. That's the kindness of God. And now the knowledge of God, which leads us into all understanding. So it's so important for us to realize that he is kind, he is faithful, and the knowledge of him keeps us from folly. So as we go into chapter 4, and God's concern for his children are that they're being foolish with these Canaanite gods. They're being really overtly foolish, interacting with prostitutes, and covertly foolish, just looking to other means of provision, of support, to other gods to help them versus Yahweh. So his main goal is to keep us in his loving kindness, his protection, his provision, and his purpose for our lives so that we can be fulfilled. I'll continue on with this week. God bless you today.